So, Brian, apparently the draft's a good idea?
Apparently, which of course, right off the bat, no, it's not. But this is a blog post, kind of an editorial, the internet version of an editorial from the Huffington Post.
Is this one of those things where it's like the opinions of this blogger do not represent those of the Huffington Post necessarily, or is this like their position?
Well, yeah, I guess maybe it's more like that. The official line for a blog for this kind of editorial work on the Huffington Post is featuring fresh takes and real-time analysis from HuffPost's signature lineup of contributors. So that's not really saying it's not their position so much. I mean, that's really saying that, yeah, this is just, fresh ideas. That
I'm sure they're
handpicked
handpicked very carefully.
Yeah, and this is from H.A. Goodman, who is an author, and I think this is important to the story to get the perspective of who exactly this guy is, the writer. And he's an author and journalist published in Salon, the Jerusalem Post, the Chicago Tribune, the Hills Congress blog, and other publications. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. But he does describe himself as a Tea Party participant, I guess you'd call that.
All right.
So I think that's important to keep in mind too.
You don't find too many Tea Partiers published on Salon.
Right. So, well, admittedly, in the past year, actually ever since the Snowden revelations, Salon's been pretty good about publishing some pretty controversial stuff about the government.
But they've also been like ripping on libertarians really hard.
No doubt. But then that's not hard. Libertarians make it very easy to be ripped upon. But anyway, this story is this blog is want to destroy ISIS. Congress should implement the draft and raise taxes immediately.
All right.
And this is from September 12th of this year.
I don't like either of these ideas.
No.
Then again,
it's a modest proposal.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't like all three of them.
You're right.
Which is, I don't see any reason to go after ISIS either. But
yeah.
Okay.
So, since President Obama recently stated ISIS is a direct threat to national and global security, and since we have a military that is overburdened from 2 wars in the Middle East, one still ongoing in Afghanistan, the American people should make some sacrifices for the next war.
I no. What?
No.
Yeah.
Haven't we sacrificed? I didn't even want to sacrifice for the first one.
This is the thing, is that, and I'll say this now, when I read this, I was like, there's no way, this guy can't be serious. But he makes sure he puts in the point that this is not a joke, that he's being quite serious.
You said he writes for the Jerusalem Post?
Yeah, for J-Post, yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, thus far, the 2.5 million
Why is he trying to get Americans to fight for him then?
Well, I think he's an American, but just he happens to write for... I mean, J-Post is about as big as the New York Times these days. So, thus far, the 2.5 million veterans of both wars, less than 1% of the population, and their families have done all the heavy lifting for our great nation. So, he is a U.S. citizen. As a result, we recently had a VA crisis that is still ongoing, a debt crisis that our grandchildren will be faced with well into their own retirement, and the threat of future budget sequestration and even shutdowns. We have a population of over 313 million people, and it isn't fair for the 2.5 million veterans or the over 500,000 active duty soldiers to defend such a large nation on their own, especially against an existential threat in ISIS. Now, I mean, some of his points here about the VA crisis, a debt crisis that's being put on grandchildren and all that, I think all that's pretty accurate that's occurring.
Yep, I got it.
Yeah, so it's time to get off the
But of course that could easily be stopped by just ending the wars and just basically minding the U.S. government, people minding their own business.
Sure.
It would certainly help as far as revenue goes, but I think that the government at this point, even with the economic downturn, probably was spending more than it could afford to, even with just the Social Security.
True.
And
absolutely true.
Medicaid
Yeah, but that's what democracy is. It's basically stealing from the unborn, the next generation. Yeah, they'll pay for it. We'll give you free stuff now in exchange for your votes, and somebody else will pay for it.
Yeah, down the line.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's time to get off the couch, America, and collectively sacrifice for national security, both through taxes to fund the next conflict and a draft like previous generations in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. ISIS wants to bankrupt this country and drag us into another quagmire, so if you believe these maniacs need to be destroyed by bullets fired from American guns, it's time for you to start firing these bullets and paying for the next war. Once we...
But, okay, how much have prices got, like, how much has been stolen from us through inflation? That's a tax that you can't get around as long as you use the U.S. dollar. And that is not an insignificant amount.
Not by any stretch. It might be the most insidious of the taxes.
Look at your receipt. I mean, like, I remember when I first moved to New Hampshire, this was 8 years ago, almost exactly. The prices, especially for things like food, were just lower. Like you could probably maybe 20%. That might not be inaccurate, right?
Well, we know that large banking organizations control the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates Federal Reserve notes known as U.S. dollars. Do you think that organization is most worried about people on the bottom of the economic food chain or on the top?
On the top.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty easy one to figure out. So, Brian, at the beginning of the show, we were talking about a blog post from Huffington Post about, all Americans need to be drafted or something?
Yeah, this is from Huffington Post. It's from H.A. Goodman, who is also a writer for Salon and J-Post, self-proclaimed Tea Party participant. And again, the title was, "If you want to destroy ISIS, Congress should implement the draft and raise taxes immediately." So, and I
love how he keeps on, assuming that I want to destroy ISIS.
Right. Yeah. That's yeah.
I don't like ISIS one bit.
Well, he did say if.
But I will. But he keeps on making sort of the assumption in the way in the writing.
That's the solution.
It's my contention. The ISIS is a creation of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, at this point, you've had decades to see what happens when the United States is involved, and apparently, we have, the United States has the same problems over and over again. Oh, they pick somebody to team up with, and then that person turns on them, and oh, boo-hoo! I can't believe that we just, gave all these weapons and training to these people, and now we're going to fight them. Well,
yeah,
I'm sick of this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, and before someone calls in, of course, they're welcome to. But I mean, it is a creation of a lot of different policies. The British Empire's policy before it was American policy. There's plenty of of reasons to go around where somebody just decided to meddle in someone else's business because they thought they knew better. And this is what happens. But let's read on with the story here. Once we defeat ISIS, we can then begin to destroy the next terrorist group that pops up, like you were just talking about, Mark, like Al-Qaeda, Iraq morphed into ISIS, with money from higher taxes and from the additional troop levels from a national draft. No, this isn't a joke. And that's the thing is when I was reading this, I kept saying to myself, he's got to be kidding, but he's not. The best way to defeat terror is to get everyone on board, so stop watching reruns of terrorists and their just for men beards holding the rifles up in glorious poses of victory. Our troop levels are far too low for another war, and like General Shinseki warned over a decade ago, if we're going to occupy Iraq again, we need more soldiers. Don't think we're just going to bomb them and leave it at that. ISIS can remain entrenched within Fallujah and Mosul even after we defeat them throughout Iraq, so an occupying force will be needed to ensure that the Iraqi government survives if indeed we intend on defeating terror, quote unquote. As John Meacham explains in a Time magazine article titled "The Case for Bringing Back the Draft," not having compulsory military service has led this nation astray in a variety of ways. And I'll read the quote here. Without a draft, we are given a great and dangerous luxury. We are in the main able to consign our war fighting to a largely isolated force of brave volunteers. The military is a noble calling, and many choose to serve for many different reasons, whether it is because of family tradition or because a recruit has few other options in life for socioeconomic reasons. The result is that the majority of Americans have little direct connection with the military. Without that direct connection, the politics of war are inescapably different than what they would be if the children of the most influential families in communities across America were at risk of being drafted to face fire at the front. And there's a lot more to this quote, but whoa.
Yeah, well, I'm not interested in these. Like, the nice thing about the not having the draft is that if you don't agree with the war, you don't have to join the military. Yeah, you got to pay for it, but you don't have to go. And the reason the draft was stopped wasn't because it wasn't because the government was feeling magnanimous. It was because they couldn't enforce it anymore. People were just opting out. They were destroying the war in Vietnam by, when they did go, they would sabotage the operation.
Yeah.
Sure.
And people who genuinely wanted to be in the military don't want to be there with draftees. Like they want. Is right, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. As a veteran myself, I've heard the personal utterances of captains, lieutenants, who have clearly stated, we do not want the draft. Okay, they don't want it at all because the people that they would be bringing over are people that are not interested in what's going on. They want volunteers and volunteers only. This General Shinseki is, I mean, that's insane.
Well, this is just another step in the indoctrination system, right? Like the state gets your kids for 13 years to indoctrinate them as much as they want.
They want them more, and they want potentially their lives.
And then the ones that make it through the indoctrination system, still not believing in the state's wars, can now be humiliated, made to do push-ups, run miles, thrown in the brig, whatever it is that they need to do physically to that person in order to get them to to break their mind and get them on board. It's just more government indoctrination centers.
Yeah, and and just one more point on that. A lot of people like to applaud, the greatest generation, that being the ones that volunteered, or the 16-year-old boys that answered the call, even when it was illegal for them to join and they went in. They call that the greatest generation because they put their lives on the line. Well, guess what? That greatest generation also gave us welfare and all of the other social programs that everybody else complains about. That is what's bringing, Mexicans and whatever other people over the border here because of their sweet deal. So much for your greatest generation. They brought in everything that makes this country not great.
Brian, we have been trying to get through this article for 3 hours, and it's about
usually how it goes on Sunday. We've made it further than we usually do.
Yeah, the suggestion is that we would all be better off with a draft.
A draft and higher taxes at that.
Yes.
So this is coming.
Well, we have wars to fight.
Yeah, this is coming from a self-proclaimed Tea Party participant.
So there's one thing I can sort of get on the board with is I don't go for the Tea Party on this guy.
Sure.
Sorry. Forget that. This guy's your standard tax and spend Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever. That's what I hear. That's what I hear from sitting over here. I could be wrong. The Republicans tend to be sort of deficit and spend.
Mm-hmm.
And Democrats tend to be tax and spend. It seems to me if an organization is going to spend, it should have money coming in rather than just building debt.
Right.
So I would say that tax and spend is, if you have two choices, which is spend and how you go about getting the money to spend, that I would say that tax and spend is more just than deficit and spend. However, every penny that government spends is money that it got from threatening somebody else with jail time or running them out of business or taking their home away from them. That's the way they do business. That's how they roll.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with you on that, but because deficit and spend means that they, pretty much strangle themselves financially. But
really, the United States is $17 trillion in the hole, and really haven't had the rating. The rating is still among the highest of bonds in the world.
Yeah, I would think sooner or later the piper's got to get paid. I don't know when that is, though. But you might be right. I'm open to that.
I'm only saying what's just.
Sure.
You're saying from a practical standpoint, maybe if we let them spend enough money, they'll kill themselves.
Well, financially. I'm saying. Anyway.
No, they will have drained our, us and our children as dry as they possibly can before they're, they run out of political capital.
Yeah, that's for sure.
At this point, I would never buy Treasury bonds. Even though people say it's such a great investment, and the return isn't that great either. People are kind of realizing that, but I don't know, just the idea of supporting this bending of the state, and that they're going to pay you back later in these inflated dollars. I mean, I'd rather buy a corporate bond from Amazon or Apple than I would with the U.S. government.
Yeah. A good friend of mine's my broker. We've known each other for many years. And now I can't say I have a lot of money with him, but he just kind of keeps my IRA. And he deals with people with a lot more money than I do, than I have. I mean, I've just, got a little bit of money with him. And he's the only guy I've got. But he's like, you should really get into municipal bonds. You don't like paying taxes. And I'm like,
Seriously?
Missing
Just
the
didn't like it
point.
when
Yeah.
Yeah.
You and I have been separated for too long. If you think that's a good idea.
So, well, as far as other people thinking that these are good ideas but are actually bad, this article, of course, as stated in the Time article, which in the article he was referencing is the case for the return of the draft, over 300 million Americans are given the quote-unquote luxury of sitting home and watching the talking heads debate how this country will defeat a terror group in a country most Americans can't even point on a map. General Shinseki asked for more than double.
Most Americans can't point to America on a map. What are you talking about?
Actually, that is true.
I don't know if it's true, but
there's been some man on the streets and they can't even name what North America is. But anyway, asked for more than the general there.
Name 2 countries in North America.
Name 4, and they'd probably try.
Give it a shot.
Asked for more than double.
Long Island.
Yeah, right. As for more, General Shinseki asked for more than double the 145,000 soldiers Bush sent to invade Iraq. So if we're looking at close to 300,000 new soldiers, we need a draft. ISIS is throughout Iraq, and bombing alone won't work. So everyone knows ground troops are an inevitability.
No, they don't.
Right.
The United States spent tens of billions of dollars training the Iraqi military, which is tens of thousands, many tens of thousands of people strong, and it's like they've done nothing against this several thousand strong organization known as ISIS. It's because they don't have popular currency in the areas that ISIS is doing well. It's because you've got a bunch of Shiites ruling over a bunch of Sunnis, and the Sunnis don't like that much.
Yeah, I mean, you have one of the clear points being missed here, no question, is the fact that Russia was dealing with the USSR, I should say, was dealing with the very same areas by and large, maybe not Iraq, but the Middle East, it had its issues, Afghanistan, etc. And what was the size of the Russian army? That was like a 5 million man army. I mean, it was huge. It was this massive army. And as far as taxes, what are you kidding? The state had all the money in the world. It was almost limitless in what they could do until, again, the piper had to get paid in the 90s and everything fell apart. But the point being is that clearly what this person is describing in and of itself, the idea that, look, we need more soldiers. No, there is already a far more brutal nation, that being the USSR, that had all the soldiers you could possibly want. And it couldn't handle this. It did not solve these problems. You're not going to solve these problems. But
certainly not with trying to maintain the borders of Iraq as they are
currently.
Not
with more money, not with more soldiers. That's been tried by countries, again, far more vicious.
They're going to have to figure it out on their own. And I don't know what I have to say about a country that has been supported by the U.S. military, has U.S. military planes and tanks and whatever they've got over there in Iraq, tens of thousands of soldiers that can't fight off a few thousand militants.
Yeah, absolutely.
That are relatively poorly armed.
Yeah. And in fact, it's amazing that I'm still confused at how ISIS got so much control so fast.
That is really weird.
Because as far as I understand it, it was a scant. I mean, we're talking in the 4 digits, just a few thousand people somehow covered a massive geographic area and had, for lack of a better word, control of it. And that, in tactical terms, is nearly impossible.
I think maybe the perception is skewed just by the coverage of it. I was just saying to you today, Brian, off the air, what happened to Al-Qaeda in Iraq? Like, you just don't even hear that talked about anymore.
Sure. Well,
whereas it used to be this big boogeyman.
Yeah, partly, and what this actually article is saying is that it morphed into ISIS, but that's not entirely accurate. Actually, Al-Qaeda still exists, and as far as I know, this is news I just heard today, not relative to this article, but Al-Qaeda has broached a peace treaty, essentially, between the Syrian rebels and ISIS. And I mean, what does that mean? Now you've got this triple entente of Arab secessionist groups or whatever you want to call it. And boy, I mean, how are you going to handle that?
Well, Obama's going to arm the moderate militants in Syria.
That was the weird thing. As the Syrian rebels, I thought that U.S. foreign policy was aiding them.
It was, but the funny part is I love the idea of a moderate militant.
Yeah.
I mean, all these moderates,
Oxymoron.
all these moderates standing up and yawning at people. I
It's
mean,
a slightly triangular circle, you know.
yeah, right. It makes
Yeah.
no sense.
I'll read on a little bit more here. Actually, I'll cut to the chase of his point. To my fellow Tea Party Americans who care about debt and who, like me, want these terrorists gone. I'm not sure exactly what that means, and I don't know who he's reaching out to, but I ask you to remember the cost of war. There's a bit more to this.
There's a lot of cost of
Yeah.
war. Yes, that's the problem
This
I
is
have
a
with
very
this.
confused individual.
Very.
855-450-3733. Are you ready for another multi-year, hugely expensive war, America? 855-450-3733. Free Talk Live. Brian, this article about the draft?
Yeah, I want to finish it up here with the last paragraph, which is kind of the dovetail for it all. To my fellow, and again, this article is about this guy is recommending, look, if we want to solve the problem with ISIS, we being the United States, we need to reinstate the draft and raise taxes.
Right, because at this point, all the soldiers are sick and tired of the crap that the Department of Defense has heaped upon them at this point, and they're ready for a mutiny if they go back in, I would assume.
Yeah. So, to my fellow Tea Party Americans.
And Obama's, by the way, I think he's just avoiding sending troops, putting boots on the ground, because he's just sending in paid military contractors. Essentially mercenaries.
Yeah.
And, of course, bombing.
But I think it's pretty much inevitable, and I find it pretty deplorable, honestly, that Obama made this. And this article references Obama's, statements on ISIS and what he wants to do about it, that he made these statements on September 10th. The day before September 11th. Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, that was so perfectly timed so that the next day everybody's thinking, yeah, and this problem still persists. Let's go send our boys back in. And of course,
as though Iraq had anything to do with 9/11.
With anything, right? Yeah. And even and especially with Iraq, it's so pathetic because even George W. Bush made a joke, a literal joke at a dinner party.
Oh, where he was looking under the table and saying, "Oh, they must be here somewhere. Those weapons of mass destruction."
Yeah, looking.
Yeah, so I don't see him under here. Don't see him under here. I mean, it was insane.
Yeah, he got a lot of negative PR for that.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, imagine if your kid died over there because you were told there were going to be weapons of mass destruction, not to mention rape rooms, and not to mention that terrorist training camps with a 747 fuselage. I remember all these things. And
yeah,
it's like
me too. The yellow cake. It's all propaganda.
And they never showed me the 747 fuselage. They never showed us the rape rooms where Kufi and Tutu or whatever there is Saddam's kids' names were that supposedly raped every woman in Iraq or whatever that was that they did. I mean, none of this stuff, all that, once they went to war, all the stuff that they said in order to get there was just forgotten.
Yeah, and they tried to do their best to make it forgotten, or again, they made an absolute mockery out of the very reasons that apparently, that the U.S. went over there. Personally, that affects me very deeply. But anyway, to go on with his points here, to my fellow Tea Party Americans who care about debt and who, like me, want these terrorists gone, I ask you to remember the cost of war. According to Harvard University, the U.S. has already borrowed some $2 trillion to finance the Afghanistan and Iraq wars and associated defense buildup, a major component of the $9 trillion U.S. debt accrued since 2001. The total cost, which will reach $6 trillion when health care costs from both wars are taken into account, and the interest from borrowing could reach trillions. To the rest of my country, in terms of actually fighting against ISIS, we'll need a draft to ensure that, they don't morph into another group and ensure they don't simply wait until we leave Iraq. Another occupation will be needed, and this will amount to boots on the ground for years and far greater troop levels. Together, though, through some sacrifice, we can defeat these terror groups so that 250,000 Iraqi soldiers, Kurdish force, and Sunni militias don't have to do it on their own. Yes, we spent over a decade in Iraq and Afghanistan nation building, and we can't let up now. We need to continue the fight, even if it lasts forever.
If you really wanted to increase the effective,
if it lasts forever.
Oh yeah, that's what he's all about. Lasts forever.
If I can,
that sounds like that's what they want.
Just this last line: open up your pocketbooks, pick up a gun, and say goodbye to your family because America needs everyone to chip in and protect liberty. This guy's not joking.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
How about he goes first?
Yeah, right. After you, buddy. I'll pat you on the back. You go for it first, Jack.
I have no intention of going. I don't care how many people go ahead of me.
Too.
I have no intention of it. And it all seems so far it's all a waste. Show me the war in the last several decades that has been worth it, and I just don't think there is one.
No. I mean, who's feeling more free, right? That's always the ultimate question. Who's feeling more free? I don't think anybody is. I think everybody's having a harder time at the airport. I think everybody's having a harder time in every situation they go through. They're getting DNA checks in Pennsylvania from getting pulled over, or blood tests, whatever. I mean, it's just all kinds of nonsense is going on. You have Ferguson and all this stuff. Who's feeling more free with all these wars? But I think this article is being incredibly honest in what it would take to keep the present system going.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right.
Yeah, he is.
There's another alternative that he doesn't mention, which is to put every U.S. troop on something that smokes and send them back towards the United States.
And close down every base.
Yeah, I just don't see any particular reason for it. If you've got, political friends over there, give them the equipment that's over there and let them hash it out with whoever it is that they're dealing with. I don't see any reason why in the world the United States military, our sons and daughters should go over there and protect the Middle East when the Saudi Arabian army seems to have no interest in it. They want it. The Saudi kings, they want the United States there involved. Well, why don't you do it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got all these people that basically are on welfare in Saudi Arabia. Give them a gun and put them to work.
Yeah. No, it's unbelievable. I mean, you could sell off the American bases. We could, the U.S. could make a ton of money off of that.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.